This is the wrist in cross-section, looking down the length of the arm. The floor and the walls are made of the carpal bones, arranged in an arch. Stretched across the top of that arch, anchored to the bony prominences on either side, is a thick fibrous band called the transverse carpal ligament, the flexor retinaculum. Together, they make a closed tunnel. Now look at what has to fit through it. 9 flexor tendons pass through, wrapped in their synovial sheaths, and alongside them, lying right up against the underside of that ligament, runs the median nerve. Here is the crucial point, and it is a mechanical one. The walls are bone and the roof is dense ligament. This tunnel cannot expand. So anything that increases the volume of its contents, swelling of those tendon sheaths, fluid, thickening, has nowhere to go, and pressure inside the tunnel rises. The softest structure in there is the nerve, and it is pinned against the stiffest part of the roof. And this is what that pressure does. The nerve is not cut, and it is not torn, it is squashed. Sustained pressure first squeezes the tiny blood vessels running within the nerve, so the nerve becomes ischemic, starved of blood. That alone produces symptoms, and it is completely reversible, which is exactly why shaking the hand helps, because it restores flow for a while. If the pressure continues over months and years, the changes stop being about blood supply. The myelin sheath, the insulation around each axon, begins to thin and break down at the site of compression, so signals slow and leak. And in long-standing severe cases, the axons themselves die back. That progression, ischemia first, then demyelination, then axonal loss, is the whole story of the condition, and it explains why the earliest symptoms come and go while the latest ones do not. The nighttime pattern is not a coincidence, and there are 2 good reasons for it. The first is posture. Pressure inside the carpal tunnel is lowest with the wrist held straight, and it rises sharply when the wrist is bent, in either direction, flexed, or extended. Most people do not sleep with their wrists neatly in line, they curl them up. So for hours at a time, the tunnel is being held in its highest pressure position. The second reason is fluid. Lying flat overnight redistributes tissue fluid, and a little extra fluid in a compartment that cannot expand is enough to tip an already tight tunnel over the threshold. Put those together, and you get the classic history: numbness that wakes the patient in the early hours, relieved by hanging the arm out of bed and shaking it. And it gives you the simplest, cheapest treatment in the whole condition: a splint that holds the wrist straight at night. The distribution is the part that makes this diagnosis, so it is worth being precise. The median nerve supplies sensation to the thumb, the index finger, the middle finger, and the thumb side half of the ring finger. Not the little finger, and not the other half of the ring finger. Those belong to the ulnar nerve. That split down the middle of the ring finger is a genuinely useful sign. Patients will often tell you, unprompted, that half a finger feels different from the other half, and no other condition does that so neatly. There is a second detail that catches people out. The nerve gives off a branch to the skin of the palm, the palmocutaneous branch, and that branch leaves the median nerve before the tunnel and passes over the top of the ligament rather than through it. So in carpal tunnel syndrome, the palm itself is spared. Numbness in the fingers with a normal palm points to the tunnel. Numbness that includes the palm suggests the problem is higher up the arm. The diagnosis is clinical first. The history does most of the work: intermittent numbness in a median distribution, worse at night, relieved by shaking. On examination, you are looking for sensory change in that territory, and in more advanced cases, weakness of thumb abduction and wasting of the thenar muscles, the fleshy bulge at the base of the thumb, because the median nerve drives those. 2 provocation tests are traditional. Tinel's sign is tapping over the tunnel to produce tingling in the fingers. Phelan's test is holding the wrists flexed for a minute to reproduce the symptoms. Both are helpful when positive, but neither is reliable enough to rule the condition out. Nerve conduction studies are the objective test. They measure how well the nerve conducts across the wrist, and they are useful to confirm the diagnosis when it is uncertain, to grade severity, and before surgery. But a normal study in a patient with a textbook history does not mean the condition is absent. For mild and intermittent symptoms, start simple. A night splint holding the wrist in neutral is genuinely effective and costs almost nothing. A corticosteroid injection into the tunnel reduces swelling and often gives real relief, though for many people, the benefit fades over months rather than lasting indefinitely. When symptoms are persistent, when there is constant numbness rather than intermittent, or when there is weakness or wasting of the thenar muscles, the operation is the definitive answer, and waiting in that situation risks permanent loss. Carpal tunnel decompression does exactly one thing. It divides the transverse carpal ligament. That is it. The roof of the tunnel is cut. The tunnel is no longer a closed box. The volume increases, the pressure falls, and the nerve is decompressed. It is a small operation with a high success rate, and the relief of night symptoms is often immediate. What recovers more slowly, or sometimes not at all, is sensation and muscle bulk in a nerve that has been compressed for years, which is the argument for not leaving it too long.